more, very specific one on the finger topic. This is Tay. She's asked what your favorite solutions are for chronic finger pain. Most of the stuff she sees is like acute treatments or rehabs. She climbing for 3 years, lifting for 5, has like knuckle synovitis. And maybe define that for people who don't know. It becomes worse with volume, classically. They're a setter, so taking time off from climbing isn't an option. And just wondering if there were any like tips and tricks for chronic finger pain that you would recommend.
Yeah, I have tons of clients that are setters for that exact reason. Elbow pain, super common in setters. Finger injuries, super common in setters. And so I think for a setter, my typical advice is your climbing training is your job. Like you want to, intentionally think that your climbing practice is what you do when you forerun set routes. And so you have like usually 3 times a week where you're climbing, that is your climbing training. You don't really get a lot more on top of that, especially not inside. Like if you're climbing outside, hopefully the outside season coincides with slow times at work and you can do less forerunning and you can allocate more energy to outside climbing on the weekends or whenever you get out. But it's just like, what are you going to do? Like you can't really recover more and recover better and do more. Like your body has its limits there. So I think that's usually a helpful recommendation. Another one I have setters do is I have them do their strength training as their warm up every day for their climbing. So like typically they'll like strip and then set in the morning and then they'll forerun in the afternoon. I have a lot of my clients that are setters lift weights in that break period as their warm up for climbing. So they're like warming up their shoulders and their hips and their back really well. Use tools that are not so flat on your fingers for the finger strength training too. And so I grab these when you're sitting there chatting. Like I love this Ninja ball. This thing is so sick. It's like a 3.5 inch. And for females, if it's a female, I'm guessing, I would maybe grab the smaller one. This one's like a 3 or a 3.5 inch tool. But the 2 and the 2.5 inch one, like that's a super comfortable position on the fingers. But I still have to squeeze it with my hand to lift it. So it's still a finger strength training tool. But it doesn't require me to bend my knuckle at 90 degrees. Like I've ultrasounded 3 fingers this morning of people that had like a big ass fucking middle knuckle on the middle finger on the dominant hand. And it's just super common. And it really just comes down to how many edges are you grabbing that have a fixed depth. That joint just gets more load. It's just really that simple. So one of the things you can do to like, I usually think about it as like, you want to trim away all the unnecessary times where you're doing that to your fingers. Right. So I think like the getting away from the fingerboard in that context is totally okay. You could drape the fingerboard, fine, but like you got to get away from flat edges. The other tool that I've been using a bunch is like the wrist wrench, because it's kind of the same thing. It's very much like an open position, but it allows you to like still squeeze hard with your hand. And then use like the unlevel edge. So the unlevel edge is a half crimp. You can use like a half crimp, but you're actually distributing the force to more the index and the pinky too. So you're on average taking a little bit less pressure off the PIP joint.
That makes sense. How do you find that the ball, what's the proper name for the ball?
I think this is Atomic makes this Atomic climbing. But it's like,
how do you find that similar or different than the uneven edge or is it just like kind of same but different?
I mean, like that's where the nuance matters. Like not really, because the interossei muscles of the hand that live between the bone metacarpals and then the lumbricals, one of their jobs is to bring the fingers together. So they like, if you were like squeezing something, like you squeeze here too. But when I'm grabbing onto a pinch, my fingers are together. I'm really squeezing something. When I'm grabbing the wrist wrench, my fingers are together. When I half crimp something, my fingers are together. Like we need something that allows you to like actually squeeze something, like maybe when I'm angry, I fucking try and squeeze an orange and make orange juice for my children. You're like at someone Reddit, you fuck this guy.
Like, I'm about to do that right after this.
Yeah, like we did the most recent YouTube video was on like rate of force. And there's like a really small, I think there's 2 papers that were done like on cadavers, and they took cadaver muscles of the thumb, I think, and the index finger, and they dissected them to do a stain to see what kind of muscle fiber types they had. And so what they showed was like the lumbricals and the interosseous muscles had more big muscle fibers. They had more type 2 motor units. And so the hypothesis was like there's some intrinsic design in our hand or evolution in our hand where the fingers are stronger if we flex the MCP joint first. So like, when you're dead hanging too, that's another thing that people do. They dead hang, they're just like, I'm just gonna fucking hang here for however, 10 seconds, that's cool. Like, that's not very active at all. Like, that's kind of not a very reasonable way to think that you would get like you want like as much muscle activity in your fucking hand as you can when you do a fingerboarding something or training. So like this tool requires you to like squeeze the shit out of something to lift it up. So it like does that. And then the other thing I've been doing with the unlevel edge is having people intentionally like curl at the MCP joint before they stand up with it. So if they're doing like a lifting style, like in your fingers are at 90, you want to flex your MCP joint and then lift it up. So it's almost like you're kind of like, think about doing the curling from the ground, but you're actually curling down into that position where you're pulling into the edge and then stand up with it. That should give you a little bit more like intrinsic muscle activation.